Welcome to Success Authority's Conversation Street with Leadership Authority, Peter Beaumont, and with Business Culture Authority, Ron Lehman, and me, Linda Ruland, Success Authority's founder.
So, Craig and I have known each other all the years, quite a long time. And we worked very closely together in SCGC, and then he invited me into a group, a group he's formed, a True North group, which is in its infancy at the moment, but is flourishing, I think, very well under his leadership. He and I crossed swords on a number of things, but we always ultimately leave friends, which is really cool. I like that. And we're opposite ends of the scale on a lot of political areas, but it doesn't stop us still being friends, which I think is very
I think
cool.
we agree on the problems for the most part. It's the solutions that sometimes elude our alignment.
And I'm always right, and so is he.
Yeah, Peter, when you get to be your age, the dementia does set in, and so I will let you believe that kind of stuff, and you'll be fine.
As you can see, he's very lucky I'm not close to him. But anyway, so
you can see keep it virtual.
Right. Yes, exactly. But Craig has an enormous amount of experience, particularly in marketing and manufacturing, and has worked with companies that have had growth issues. So I thought he would be great to have on here and help us work through this discussion in Conversation Street. So
I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, welcome, Craig.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully we won't regret it.
I started regretting it as soon as I saw Peter, but after that, I was fine. When Ron came on, I was good. No, Peter, they're very kind words. I do appreciate our friendship because it does make sure that I get to see the various sides of issues.
So our topic today is, why do companies struggle with growth? And that can be a far-reaching and very deep topic. My challenge to you is, where do we start with something that's actionable on the part of our audience?
Yes, that is a fairly broad topic. I can tell you that with the companies I worked for, it does not matter the size. Most companies struggle because however many levels they have, each level thinks the company represents something else or serves someone else. And until an outsider comes in and says, let's bring all these disparate views together into a common view, typically focused on the end user, the customer, growth chokes itself off because you can't be everything to everybody. And the best quick example I can give you is I did work for a national feed producer here in the Twin Cities. And they produce feed for all sorts of different types of livestock. And the number of items that they lost money on outnumbered the items that made up the 80% of the profits they made. And they didn't think there was anything they could do to get rid of those. So they were selling so much on price that they were crowding out their ability to produce items that they could make a lot more money on. But they didn't know it because nobody ever did the analysis. So it's just that knowledge of what are we really all about?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think one of the things that I've come across is that some of these companies don't define what growth really is. So what am I trying to grow? Is it top line, bottom line? And why? And some of the smaller companies I work for suffer from, maybe I don't need to grow. Maybe I'm okay being a lifestyle business. And we talked about this before. And sometimes that suits the smaller companies. The trouble with that mentality, I believe, is that, if you don't grow, what's the alternative?
Mm-hmm.
It's normally death. So it's difficult. It's like saying I don't want to change. Change is going to happen whether you like it or not.
Well, Peter, that's what I was going to add to what you had said, is these lifestyle type businesses And you and I talked briefly about this last week, and I was going over a bunch of the companies that I'm either talking to or working with, and they all are sort of stuck in there. And the problem is that if you want to be a lifestyle business, that's great, but plan to manage your business to zero, because if you can't evolve or can't change, the market's going to move past you. And if you're managing going forward by what happened yesterday, you're still only solving the problems of the people that they had yesterday. And so it's really important to understand where's the puck going, so that can we evolve towards where that's going to be. And it doesn't matter the size, scope, scale of the business, whatever. It really is, where are we going to grow to? And what's our customer going to do during that growth? Or are we going to change our customer? And Peter, you said something else that I really agree with, is the top line, bottom line, because those are two of the three levers that I look at. Is you should only do things that drive top line sales, do things that drive bottom line profitability, or do things that aggressively manage the expense line. And if you're doing anything else, it should be stopped immediately, because it's not adding value to the organization. It's only creating complexity that detracts from those things you're trying to do.
Both of you have talked about, and just it's what it sounds to me like is that there's some fundamental questions that have to be asked before you launch into growth. And that is, as you both mentioned, what is that? What do we mean by growth? Where is that coming from? Why are we doing it? And then we can get to the how. And I suspect a lot of organizations jump right past those and jump into the how before really thinking about being strategic about that, because growth is expensive, not only in cash, but just in the disruption of the organization. I've worked with organizations who grow to the point of damaging their core business, because you've got to run the business while you're growing it. You can't really let's just stop, and we'll take a couple of years to work all our growth plans out, and then we'll get back into business. So seems to me often that's underestimated, is the complexity of what it's going to take, as opposed to, well, whatever we're doing, we'll just do more of it.
Well, and Ron, I think it brings to mind a really great example of this dairy company I worked with years ago. And they were growing, but their complexity was growing faster than their sales. And so they did exactly what you said, is they retrenched and said, okay, well, really, who are we really? And they decided they were a liquid dairy company to provide either finished goods or ingredients to people that were going to add liquid dairy to their products. So it got them out of all the cheese stuff. It got them out of all the milk stuff. They weren't going to compete in the commodity milk. It was all value added. And when they did that, they really supercharged their growth, because they knew exactly what they wanted to do, which really narrowed their focus on who their customer could be. And to me, and Peter is a huge Simon Sinek fan, as am I. And you talked about it, Ron, we want to do the how right away. And as Simon had said in his golden circle, the why, the what, and the how kind of is an outcome of that. If you really understand the fundamental why you're doing what you're doing, the how and the what tend to be outcomes. And I've really shifted my focus over the last 3 to 4 years on profitability, because as a business unit leader, profit, that's what we were charged with. But profit's an outcome of properly managing your business and managing your growth. Because the growth in a construction company here in town, they have bought up most of their competition. And what they found is that they pay a premium, a higher and higher premium for their competitors. And the market that they're in, the margins become lower and lower and lower. And they realize that's not the pathway to growth or good growth. But because the patriarch of the organization and family member is late 80s, can't change, won't change. And so they continue to do these things that mean that they work harder and harder and harder for every dollar of profitability they generate. And I think that's another lesson to be learned, is that think of it, and as I talk to people, I talk about it of investing. If you could invest $1, what would you want to get back? Which would you choose? Can I get a penny back for each dollar invested, a quarter, or another dollar? And that's a pretty easy math equation, is that, well, I want the dollar. I certainly don't want the penny, so I'll accept the quarter. And it's just amazing to me how stuck people get on, Peter, and you said this early on, what is growth supposed to mean? And they just meant volume. They wanted to sweat their assets and move product through the facilities. Well, they maxed out capacity in aged plants without ever realizing all that did to their efficiency was destroy it, meaning that they made less and less on everything because they didn't stay focused on what they were supposed to be about and their why for being in business.
Yeah, I think the other factor is what you said is profitability to a certain extent is a measure of the value you're providing. And
exactly.
And your value can suffer through that example you just gave because inefficiencies, quality goes down, and all of a sudden all those things you did really well, it's harder and harder to do those as you scale up. And so it really starts to erode the profit.
So, yeah, a couple of things that strike me as you were talking, Craig, is that I like the way you're using examples, and I was reaching deeply into the vault. But when I was with Coca-Cola, one of the things that is a problem, by the way, for most corporate, when I say corporate, I don't mean just, 20 employees that operate like a corporation. I mean large corporations. And most of them are under the scrutiny of the stock market, and they have to produce quick results. And so most of the stimulus for larger companies for growth is as a result of the stock market dictating that, basically, or your stock will go down. And I think this has been a problem for a number of companies. It was, for example, Richard Branson took most of Virgin off the stock market and privatized it for that very reason. Coca-Cola went through the same issue. They wanted quick growth. The stock market was asking for it. So they started a plethora of brands in the belief that their distribution system was so powerful, which it was and is, would drive that consumer demand. But that doesn't drive consumer demand, just producing goods, unless you actually got the right target market, to reference what you were saying earlier, Craig. That doesn't drive it. And so what they ended up doing is focusing back on the four major brands, which at that time were Fanta, Coke, Sprite, and Diet Coke. And the growth was exponentially much higher than it had been with the strategy they were trying before, and got the kind of returns. So that leads you to, where's your growth come from? You can either sell more to an existing consumer, right? We've all heard this before, or you get new customers. And clearly the new customer one didn't work at that time for Coca-Cola. Later they did, but it was controlled growth then. They didn't just try and go out. They decided that growth had to be controlled, and they would enter each market specifically with new products.
Did they that new products, was part of that the sort of brand extension wave that passed through all businesses where, well, we'll just have 19 kinds of Coke? Or was it new products?
No, these were new. So they were bringing out coffee, which they'd done in Japan. Now it's very popular, by the way, but they brought a product from Japan. Coffee is really popular over there from vending machines. They brought it over into the States. They were bringing out derivations of Minute Maid orange juice. They were bringing out completely new brands like Fresca, bringing out, which now we know pretty well, but they were just then they went to line extensions, by the way. And that's when they realized, wait a minute, let's sell more of a similar thing to the same consumer, or broaden our consumer base with vanilla or with Coke Zero or whatever. But that's become much more latter. and that's going deeper in your target and then extending it out. So it's much more controlled than it used to be. By the way, water was a big thing too.
And that speaks to a interesting thing that I've identified really with smaller companies, startups specifically, but moving into small companies, is that they do two things that make me nervous. They tend to think that every customer has their passion for the product they're selling. And so they make that mistake of the product is the hero. And then the second is that they look at sales as transactions. And I always look at sales, you want the recurring sale. And so, Peter, when you're talking about some of the Coke brands and all the, soft drinks, any of the beverages and salty snacks and cookies and crackers are all what in the grocery business we used to call expandable consumption items. Is if you got people to buy a larger package size, they tended to consume more, which is why Oreo used to sell buy one, get one free all the time. Because what they found was that if you bought a package of Oreos, it took you a week to consume it. And I don't know if that's accurate, but some number of days. If you had two packages, that second one was gone in much less time, or the two were gone in less than 14 days, because you stopped worrying about limits and scarcity. You said, oh, I live in a land of plenty. I've got all the Oreos I could possibly want. I'll have another. And that was the 6-pack, 12-pack, 24-pack when I was at retail, when you watched all the soft drink companies ramp up to the 24s, and you saw the beer guys go to 30 packs, and you saw Walmart selling cases of 1 liter bottles of clearly Canadian, while stores were selling individual bottles, because Walmart was trying to say, I want to take the customer out of the market. And so they were doing what they needed to do. But it's that expandable consumption of, if I get people to buy more, they'll consume more and come back sooner. So it plays to both the basket and the traffic, because they bought more in their one purchase, they consume more, so came back sooner to get more. And it's just an interesting, if you can find products that do that, or that people will consume if they have more, that's a pretty good place to be. And it's one of the reasons in what I do is I try not to price by the hour, because then everybody, well, I don't want to consume it. If you pay me a retainer for the month and you can have unlimited access to my time, well, I provide more value, and they see more value. So it's that value creation, whether it's real or perceived.
Yeah, but you're not impulse purchase. So, and that's what drives, to your analogy, it was a really good one. The same with Coke. The more we could get into the house, the more we knew it would get consumed, because it's impulse.
Yep.
To a large degree, soft drinks, as are confectionery, as are some of the products you were mentioning, Oreos, same thing. So the more you can get in the home, the more you can get it consumed. And so our growth, by the way, reminded me, Craig, of when we went from a litre to a litre and a half to 2 litre, pretty much bucket, which eventually ran its because ultimately people are not going to consume that in a single setting.
Right.
And the carbonation eventually goes off. So it ran its course. I think it's topped out at 2 litre now.
All these examples though are great, because they go back to that, it's you have a lot of choices on how you're going to grow. And if you've done the why part, then I think it's a lot easier to measure those against each other and decide which is the best path forward. I think the other piece of that is, what will growth mean to the organization, to the people? And again, that sort of focused passion, the entrepreneur, the head of the company may really be passionate about growth, but other people in the organization may think, is that going to mean more work for me, or how's this going to affect me? And I think oftentimes, as growth is being rolled out, that message is not communicated particularly well through the organization. It's, we're going to grow, it'll be great. And that may not be what everyone thinks about.
How many organizations have we probably collectively witnessed where and your speciality, Ron, in many ways, is culture, where the organization runs so fast, the culture completely changes. right? It's not the organization it was 5 minutes ago. Slight exaggeration, but that it can happen so easily with uncontrolled growth, and it just becomes, instead of something that was started by half a dozen people with the common values in mind, they bring all these new people in, pretty much all unchecked for values at the door because they just need bodies, and the whole organization changes, and as a result, doesn't succeed.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to submit a question, email Success Authorities at inquire@successauthorities.com.